the reason everybody normally doesn't want to sit here, I'm like,
Enjoying it.
I would
now.
rather move further north. That would be
yes.
anything cooler.
And I think it feels hotter because it's September. You know, 90 in July, you
Yeah.
don't hit it as much.
Not in this
but-
state, we don't.
I like the heat when I'm like just like chilling in the water or something and hanging out. But if I'm sitting in front of a computer or doing paperwork in the heat, it's just like
It's intense.
Every single kid had a problem with their dryer today. So I sat there next to dryers while they were blowing, and it was just like. So student housing, that's why I fix their dryers.
I am.
Well, my maintenance
2
tech
o'clock.
only does,
Fine, I
but
had to pick up puppy
he's on
board
vacation,
and
so.
try to do a little dusting and
Oh,
I didn't get to
please.
my
they're all
desk.
cleaning their towels from
Please.
swimming and bathing.
It's been a while
I don't know.
since I've been up, and
Well, that's literally with
Oh my
I
God.
basketball.
wish it wasn't under.
like
Well, I
towels.
don't say I wish it
And
wasn't.
I'm like,
working downstairs.
sitting there and I'm like,
Good.
oh, the hose fell off.
Aaron and I are thankful that we have our own little unit,
Oh, something got there. So then I'm like in back.
especially since
With
she
the dryer
walks
like
and
inevitably on when I get there.
She
The
came
place
back
is like
from lunch today and she
a
said,
million times hotter,
I am
crawling
so
behind
glad
it,
it's
trying to
They just-
humid, trying to put the dryer
Everybody
vent
that
back
works
on,
inside's gotta be happy.
sweating like
I felt so bad
profusely,
for all those workers.
going like, oh my god, I love
I only
Rich.
worked
I just
outside
want
maybe
Rich
3
back.
hours at the
Like, I just want my maintenance
doctor's
guy back.
appointment.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't even remember what copy I
yeah.
was with.
Yeah.
and-
It's crazy.
I think it only hit 87 though.
Holy.
Recording in progress.
That sounds like a good cue to.
Oh really?
All right. It is 6:31, and I will call our meeting of the Planning Board to order of September 7th. I will read the roll to begin, and just we have Planning Board members here and Housing Committee members here, and I'll just read the Planning Board members at this point. Myself, John present. Rebecca is excused this evening. Phil,
Present.
Neil is absent. Mike,
Yep.
present. Mark,
Here.
Susan,
Here,
and then alternates. Zach is not present. Michael Bouchard is excused this evening. He sent the message earlier. And Peter is excused for a longer extent of time. All right, so first up we have our minutes of August 17th to review.
August 17th, that was the last meeting. Move we accept the minutes as written?
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the minutes. Any,
To approve the minutes.
to approve the minutes, thank you. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
I,
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I abstain, I was not here at the last meeting.
I
I think
approve.
it was I abstain as well.
Okay.
I wasn't here either.
There were 3 ayes.
Yes, and 2 abstentions. No, yeah. All right. So, put this aside. Organized here. Communications received. Do we have anything? Under Joseph is not here this evening, but
No, none that I'm aware of.
okay, sounds good. Are there public comments not related to the business on the agenda, which would be zoning amendments and housing issues? No. Okay. Committee reports?
Any updates on the CIP? Just out of curiosity.
a couple of months ago, we just got together to see who's on the committee and kind of come up with a schedule, and they've been working the schedule. And I think the end of September, we're gonna be getting together to start pulling everything together.
Okay.
So everybody's been turning in all their information.
Department
and-
heads.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
Scott and Ann have been working very diligently on that, and
Great.
I believe it was mid to late September, they're gonna start reaching out to pull everybody together.
Thank you.
I will also mention, I will not mention the HOP committee because we'll be talking quite extensively about that. There is the cluster project that we were talking about in the spring, and haven't heard back in a while about like updates on that at this committee. And I know Mike is representing this committee on that, as well as other people from the town. Well, you nominated yourself
haven't
and we
heard of-
accepted you.
Uh-huh.
You nominated yourself and we accepted you.
The
And
planning board did.
yeah.
Okay. I just haven't heard anything about
No,
it.
that's why I'm speaking now. The Board of Trustees, I guess it was, nominated and approved myself as the lead for the university on that. And it looks like that's going to start moving forward. I have a meeting coming up soon with the provost, and we'll start talking about details and timelines and other such things.
Super. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations to you too. Condolences.
Okay. New business. We'll be discussing this evening the housing study and progress on that, and related business having to do with the housing project. And so at this point, I'll also call to order the, actually, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. I will call to order the housing committee as well, which is a subcommittee of the planning board. And read the roster from the housing committee. Myself, present. Sue.
Here.
Mike.
Yep.
Patty cannot be here tonight. Matt.
Present.
Bruce.
Yep.
Brian Chalmers is not here. No, Brian Chalmers and Brian Eisenhower are not here tonight. All right. So let me just turn my notes over here, and I see we have members of our planning on Zoom as well. Hello. So just a few words on progress before we jump right into the meat of these issues. And I'll turn it over to anyone from Borough Planning if you want to kind of jump in on this. But as I see it right now, we have phase 1 basically complete. I believe we are finalizing, or our planning is finalizing, a few issues from the CRM comments on the phase 1 report, and phase 2 is getting closer to being complete with the regulatory issues that we're still talking about. And of course, phase 3 is what we're in the thick of now, with looking at recommendations for regulatory changes in the community here. And community engagement is also spelled out in the document you should have received, giving us a kind of agenda of what's coming up for community engagement and planning board meetings and other such things going forward. And I'll want to address a few of those things in a couple of minutes before we get into the recommendations. But does anybody from our planning want to say anything at this point about the progress?
Oh, I think that you pretty much summed it up well. John, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I think the phase 1 report is within a week of being in your hands.
Okay.
And we had talked about perhaps leaving the phase 2 report a bit open in case there's some, work that perhaps is not really ready to go to a town meeting next year, but the board may want us to work on. We may want to go back and forth a little bit with some of the findings in that document, so we might just hold that back a little bit, but there aren't going to be any substantial changes to it.
All right, thank you. So looking at the immediate horizon of what we're up to, this Saturday we have the yard sale, and we on the housing committee have decided to have a presence at the yard sale. And so we're going to have some flyers at the registration tables downtown here and at the airport group site. And for some time in the late morning, early afternoon, we'll have a table and a tent, I believe, we've had confirmed, at the group site as well at the airport. And Sue, you've agreed to be there for a little bit.
In the morning.
I can tentatively be there for a little while, kind of take over when you go. I've got a lot on my plate right now. And I could possibly be there a little bit. Does anybody want to volunteer for that? Like, planning board member?
What are the hours?
Well, the yard sale as a whole, I think, is 9 to 3. And Sue, you said you could be there late morning, I think, right?
Yeah, I guess they said the best time probably to go up at the airport area was about around 10 to 12.
Sure, the opposite on
Okay.
They thought that would be a really good time to catch a lot of people and hand out stuff.
So there,
That's when I'm gonna be there.
so you're gonna be there 10 to 12,
I
but
am.
then you need someone from 12 to 3?
I guess if we're gonna.
Or, I mean, we don't have to be there the entire time. We can leave some flyers behind as well.
I was
But
gonna say, I can't do 10 to 12, but I could do afternoon hours. So I could relieve you at noon.
And I think some of the feel too is some of the discussion the other day was that people want to hit the ground running for yard sales. They are really focused on yard sales, and so for us to stand there and say, "Oh, could I talk to you about," so I think the flyers are really it's gonna be more of handing out and trying to get people, to at least be aware that something's going on, and so I think that's the gist of it.
and we will have a large map there that we can look at, like, hey, where would you like housing, kind of casually. We know we're not gonna get people, well, you never know, but unlikely to get people engaged in like a half-hour long conversation when we're trying to like rummage for all the latest yard sale finds. But we might get some engagement.
We're gonna make an appearance anyway, and I think that's really what we need. We just need to be out there. So that's
I'll plan on seeing you there at noon,
okay.
around then. I have a soccer game at 10, but I
Yeah.
should be back by noon.
That's fine.
Thank you.
You're at the airport.
Yes.
John, can I give you an update on the materials?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Sure. So, unfortunately, I reached out to UPS today, and their large format printer is broken.
Oh.
So, I reached out to another printer. I think it's what is it? Minute. It's on
Megaprint?
Minuteman Press.
Yep.
Is anyone familiar? I think they're on Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I haven't heard back from them yet. So I will keep you posted about the status of the, if we can get the large format map, but if not, so John, I went ahead and I made the changes that we talked about for the public. It's got the building footprints and, things like slope and wetlands that can also kind of show people what's left. And we can, if there's anyone on staff who could possibly print them as 11 by 17 tomorrow, then that can be, you can have some of those there if we can't get the printer to get back to you.
I will mention one of the university does large scale printing and does it well. I haven't actually printed anything with them large scale in a few years now. I know they used to do a really good job of it pretty quickly, I think. You?
I was
I
gonna
was gonna
ask
say, I
about
was gonna
that.
suggest that.
Yeah.
Reach out to them, because I know that they have a GIS lab, and I know that
Right.
part of their GIS lab is to print large-scale maps, so.
And they print all kinds of stuff as well, like
So,
the GIS stuff. Yeah.
It's something that the new university liaison should reach out to people at the university and have that conversation.
Is that you, John?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
That's a
I'll
separate
touch base about
committee,
that, 'cause it's-
Just saying, like,
Oh,
opportunities.
And then my only other question, John, was do you know, so I know Joseph got the 11 by 17 maps for tonight. Do you know if he also left the flyers behind?
Yes.
Okay. Hooray.
Right.
Thanks.
So a few other quick updates. So also, if you want to touch base with either myself or Sue just to get a little lay of the land beforehand, you can. Let's see. I'll be working this week on a letter to the editor for the most likely just the Record Enterprise to give a bit of more public update on where we're at and get some interest in the very busy process we have coming up this fall. And I'm going to be circulating that out to the committee for discussion next Tuesday. And then hopefully getting it out to Record Enterprise later next week for the publication the following week. And we got a meeting in a box kind of ready to go with maybe a few minor adjustments where we can kind of meet with smaller groups for a little bit more engagement. And so we have various engagement strategies kind of mapped out for the fall immediately and kind of more extended. And I don't want to get too deeply into that. The Housing Committee is talking a lot about that, and we have a lot to talk about tonight other than that, so I kind of want to keep moving along, but just to give you all a heads up on where we're at. All right, so this evening, we have two major things on our docket. One is this map, which you should all have in front of you, and if you don't, there are more copies right there. And the other is continuing our discussion of our zoning recommendations, potential amendments that we've already started. And I want to leave plenty of time for that because it's probably going to be complicated, as talking about zoning amendments often is. So what I'm thinking for this map is we spend probably about a half hour looking at it, talking about it, and then give you some time for further reflection, and then return to this again to have a more conclusive discussion at a future meeting. So what we're looking at here, I don't know, actually, do you guys want to introduce this, or would you like me to introduce this? I guess I'll say a few words if you want to add
I
anything.
think you should go ahead.
Yeah.
I think we kind of want to let you run your meeting, and we'll be available to help if
Okay,
needed.
sounds good. So we have a map here, and you see some potential areas marked out where there's potential for housing or interest in housing, as gleaned from our master plan and other discussions, especially our master plan though, and you see they're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we've discussed some of these already at our meetings, the Housing Committee and the Planning Board, and we want a little bit more feedback on what these areas might look like, which areas we want to focus on. It might not be all 5 of these, but how do we feel about each of these areas, and for targeting for more housing and regulatory changes, and if we are interested in some of these areas, what changes might you want to see there? And you know, that could be what type of housing do you want to see there? Would it be single family, multifamily, attached single family, and so forth, mixed use, and what other kind of changes would we want to see there?
For which locations?
This is potentially a very long discussion, which is why I'm trying to limit it to like a half hour. But we have these 5 locations marked out, and basically, how do we feel about these potential boundaries for targeting areas? And if we do have an interest in a couple of these areas or more, what would we want to see in each of these areas? The one we've probably talked about most is 5 at this point. And we've had a more tentative discussion of some of these other areas. And we can be pretty open-ended about this, and I think this could be a good exploratory conversation now, and then reflect for like a few weeks, and then come back and have a more pointed discussion.
You know, my biggest piece is one. I think we have individuals that are wanting to develop. We have individuals that are ready to develop. It has access to sewer, water already set up, and it could significantly support all of the things that we want to be able to do as an overlay. I think that's a great location. I do have a problem with mixed commercial residential. I
In
think
general,
that's
or in particular
in
areas?
general. Like
Okay.
I think in one that would be great. You know, they can run a little shop on the bottom for a village, and you know, condos and whatever above. There's lots of ski areas that do that. I have a problem increasing the number of residential places above commercial units on Main Street. You know, that increases parking issues, that increases you know, all sorts of other problems that we have downtown. I think group section 4 is a fantastic location for us to increase single-family homes, you know. 2 and 3, I kind of love the large amount of green space that we have in that area. It's inside our agricultural zone.
It's a bit of an overlap of a few different.
The red area in the middle is the ICD.
Yeah, that's the middle, but I'm like 2, that whole wooded section. I do know that up into that red section, I'd heard something about Habitat for Humanity looking to put stuff in there. I think that's a fabulous idea. You know, single family homes that people get to build equity as a family. You know, that's always going to be my push. You know, my fear is too many apartments being put in town. I mean, not just because I manage apartments, but our goal is to bring people to town and have them build equity. And if we just flood the place with developers that are like, I'm going to put in all sorts of commercial stuff and put 15, 20 units above my place, and it's not helping families come to the area and grow and develop that equity.
In many ways, we have less control over whether units end up being rentals or condos and
Yep.
owned with that equity that you're talking about, and more about density and typology and stuff like that.
I realize that, which is why I believe 1 is such a fabulous opportunity, because it literally stretches from the traffic circle the whole length, and they can go bananas in there, and I'm not quite sure how much we really need in town. You know, if you build it, they will come. Like, I know that none of this is town's building. This is all just potential. But, I mean, if he builds 3,000 units on Tenny, that's a whole lot of people to town. It changes our quaint little community. So I love that spot. I want to be able to let them, which I'm bummed that Mike's not here tonight, but I'd support that every single day and let them grow that facility and do all the things that they want to be able to do. Nothing's off limits for me in terms of what they want to be able to do in there.
I mean, one of the things I would just add, I mean, I do agree there's a lot of potential for growth there, and at the same time, I'd also like to see more growth where we have potential. You know, there's a lot of stuff in the master plan and elsewhere in terms of the community about like walkable neighborhoods and stuff like that, and that's more likely to happen in one of the other parts of town than it is at Tenny.
And I think inside the 5, I believe that allowing accessory dwelling units, you know, closer to, I love the section where it's like mirror the neighborhood that it's in instead of setting a distinct setback, because I counted the other day, 9 of my properties are sitting on the property line. You know, that allows neighborhoods like yours where you have if you were to put a garage, I'm sure one of your neighbors 2 houses over has a garage sitting on a property line.
Mine is.
Yeah. So allowing more people to put that in, put accessory dwelling units above garages, allows families to stay together, allows people to have, you know, families to be able to stay in their home and have a family member move back and take care of them.
And we'll talk about some of those recommendations in a little bit.
So those are the walkable, increased neighborhoods that you could talk about. I don't believe putting housing on Tenny Mountain Highway is going to make a walkable neighborhood. I think it's going to make Tenny Mountain Highway, which is already becoming difficult to commute over, increasingly difficult if we put, you know, 500, you know, apartments on Tenny Mountain Highway. I just don't believe that that's going to be a good option. But that's spoke my piece. That's all I got.
So I'd like to add in, there's parts of what Bruce said that I'm 100% behind, and there's even parts that John talked about that I am,
Stamp this down this time here.
So you make a note of that? All right. It's down, it's recorded, Mike. It's
And go.
recorded.
so, yeah, you know, downtown, number 5, you know, obviously the storefront owners are concerned about more residential units on the main street where the parking is an issue. Parking is a huge issue in this town. We can't ignore that. And if we try and ignore it, we're gonna fall on our faces. I do like John's idea that walkable's not a bad thing. And but it's not just on Main Street. There's walkable areas in all of 5 to get to a store. And we're in kind of a unique situation in that Plymouth State is pulling back and bringing students, 2/3 of them already, sophomores and juniors are pulled back to campus. And now we hear that maybe the seniors will get pulled back. That's another third that could be happening in the next year or two. That puts a lot of housing in the downtown that's walkable. So maybe we don't need to target Main Street, but there's still housing that's already built in there. And there is talk, now fresh talk, about, you know, if someone needs housing for, say, a ski area on the other side of town, maybe they talk to some of the landlords that have rented to college kids in the past, and now there's not so much a need, but they could get a vehicle or a van to downtown, pick up the workers for the morning to the ski area. They don't have to build their housing for their workforce, but maybe
I think that's their goal, though.
it's,
I think Mike's talked about it multiple times. That he
yeah, there's now
wants-
talk,
He wants workforce housing.
now there's talk about a different avenue potentially.
Yeah.
So, section 1, where Tenny Mountain is the biggest draw for our town, is that ski area. And if we're gonna bring in second homes that we don't have to school the kids, and they're coming from Massachusetts and everywhere else, along the ski area is where we're gonna attract them and bring them in. It's a win-win for this town to get housing that we don't have to teach the kids, more of a larger tax base, and that is the area to fit it in, not necessarily, you know, where there's not a store to shop and clothing, which might be where the college kids were living. We have such a unique opportunity that we've never had in the history of Plymouth that's happening right now. And this is huge, and things,
One problem for that, the president just talked to the board and said that he wanted to try to increase his first-year class, what was it, 40%.
They
That's
did-
his goal.
they
That's
did
his
that in
goal.
2017 and brought in
40%.
a bigger class.
Yes.
But then the next year, it was right back down.
That's what he's aiming for. Whether it's going to happen, what it's going to do, who knows?
And even with that goal, the goal is still to keep
Oh,
those
yeah.
students on campus for
They want to be
several
full.
years. Yeah.
That's ultimate. They have 2,532 beds.
So
Every bed that they don't have someone living in is $10,000. That's what it boils down to. They need to be able to stay open. They stay open by creating revenue.
Yep.
Just like myself and off-campus housing. You can't have empty beds. They had 80% of their beds filled. 20%, I mean, they left $1.2 million on the table. That's why they keep pulling kids back on. They need the revenue. You know,
So I also have some positive things to say for Will and Judy and Alexis, that I love the find about where we used to be in this town 20 some odd years ago, where if you had, and I'm talking about Area 4 along Fairgrounds Road, that when you have public water and public sewer, you go from an acre to a half acre with one public service, and then the second, you could get down to a quarter acre. Somehow that got lost, and the least you could get was to a half acre. I think that was a great find, and I think that's gonna serve the town well, wherever we have either, town water and town sewer. So I'm really, I'm hopeful that that will help with the housing situation, and the fact that the college is pulling back kids onto campus. It might be shrinking, that then we have a huge amount already built in town. And so I'm hopeful that the town will be set for many, many years to come, just with those small changes.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments?
Just a question on area 2.
Yep.
I read this as it's saying that there is water and sewer out there. I don't think there really is.
Not
There-
in two.
There sort of is.
There's part,
Just on Tenny Mountain.
Yeaton Road, that's it. That's really that one sliver,
Yeah.
section 2. The rest of it I don't think has any water.
And it's halfway up, so essentially where 5 breaks off, that's where the water tower is. So right in that little, between 2 and 5 is where the water tower sits. And everything further up that is, there's nothing.
so just to clarify, I mean, a couple of people have mentioned this area over there as being wooded or water and sewer issues. If you were drawing this, would you either of you draw number 2 differently?
I'm gonna,
Or does not have a 2 at all, because we don't really want to target that?
I don't want to target that area, you know, except for the one that I think what they're talking about is taking from, I think it's, was it Ledgeview? I think that's the one it is. My eyes are so bad. Claybrook. Taking Claybrook all the way down and connecting it down to a possible housing development for habitat. I think that's the one piece, which I think that's fine. Like, I certainly don't like the increased traffic on my road, but I think it's a great housing development opportunity. But huge sections of 2. Well, first of all, I mean, is Matt's grandfather actually going to sell that property? Because I'm fairly positive it's all under current use right now.
Which one?
In the huge sections
I
of
mean,
2.
leaving
So basically
individual
from,
landowners aside, though, which
I would not want to see that developed. It's a nice wooded section of town that's, you know, historically been within inside that ag zone and is timbered every, 30 years, has good wildlife. You know, I wouldn't want to see it cut up and turned into, because you're never going to get water and sewer out there because we don't have enough bandwidth at our current facility to add water and sewer there. The benefits of 4 is we already have water and sewer out there. They've already got a certain amount of limit that they know that they can have. Tenny has like 10 times the amount of water and sewer available to them than they use, which is why they, are so giddy to develop, because they don't have to add to it. They've just been paying for it for decades and not used it. They want to use the facility that they've been paying for.
So we like the eastern side of 2, which has like the habitat stuff. It also has like the area around Highland, where Highland comes into Tenny Mountain, where there's already a lot of housing. And there's,
Yeah,
more
like this
and there's
little
already
section.
more discussion of people putting extra housing in there at this point already.
Right in here,
Yeah.
there's already lots of housing, and they're looking to put it up in here.
Among other places. There's already
Is where
even more
the
discussion.
habitat was
Yeah.
looking. So I mean, if that connected in here and you just did a little bit in here, that's fine. But this whole section, all the way down into there is like,
Also the western end.
yeah, that western end is all beautiful wooded habitat for, because we're just going to increase our bear population probably if we start. They're already downtown. And I think 4 is awesome. I think we should extend that. During our meeting, that all of Fairgrounds Road was, people put, stuff out there, and the residents that live out there were like, we'd love more of this.
One other thing that, along with what Bruce is saying, I wouldn't even mind, because Barrett Planning came up with the suggestion of giving a higher density, and everybody that we talk to keeps pushing equity, equity, equity. They want people to have equity. And if we could promote a higher density for some areas, that provide an opportunity for people to build wealth rather than keep them down in an apartment. That's my feeling, and I hope, Barrett, I hope that's where you were thinking of giving some sort of bonus allowance.
Well, we'll get to some of the overlays and some of the other opportunity zones and stuff like that that we can talk about. We will, I think, have that discussion a little bit later. I know it's a side conversation over here, which, not to call you out, but like,
Just
I was just wondering if there was something important to.
I was just trying to get clarification about where the Habitat site was, because
Okay.
that's all, and Matt, just, that's all it was doing.
She said it was, if I don't know the right spot,
Yep.
it's like right there.
So far, it seems like we've already had some discussions about 5 and what that might look like, and we seem to be moving forward with that, I think. 4, there seems to be a lot of excitement about. 1, there seems to be interest in. And 2 and 3, there's a little bit more reticence at this point. Is that a fair assessment of where we are? I mean, we can continue this discussion. I'm just kind of trying to gauge where we are at this point. And it's also the next question. You mentioned equity, but like, what sort of housing would we even be trying to promote in these various places? Would it be open space development? Would it be attached single family? Would it just be more standard single family? Would it be
I think on the board,
duplexes, multifamily?
I want
I
to
think
say,
a mixture of everything. If I,
Okay.
6 units and less, down to single family. Give them all
lots
kinds of
of tiny,
options.
like those tiny houses that we'd had on the board, there was lots of excitement about those, you know? Because a younger generation they don't want a giant house. They want 1,200 square foot house.
Phil's
Yes,
got something to
Phil's
say.
got something.
Oh, I know.
Simmering.
Those-
He's simmering.
They're not, like, those are great to build, like, they're stupid cheap, and then you realize you have to hook them up to water and sewer, and like, then you're up to regular old house construction costs, like, why put a trailer under it? Put a foundation under it, build a small starter house that's affordable.
exactly.
You don't have to put it on a trailer frame.
Oh, no. I'm not talking tiny house
I
that
know.
way, but I'm talking like the ones that they built over in like
They
Dover.
are affordable, it's a good entry, but like, they're not really expandable
I think
either.
I've
Like,
talked
they're-
to
like,
Judy before.
Basic capes are a far better
There are
solution
other
for
options,
starter
including any
homes.
attached single family, and as we were talking about as well, and we'll talk
Yeah.
about later as well.
Right.
You know, I'm all for 19s, 50s bungalows. I told you
Yeah.
this before. Like, I think that they served Plymouth well. Like, we have a huge stock of those homes in town.
They're
They're,
desirable.
You
They
know,
sell- every time one comes up, they sell quickly.
yeah,
If-
because they're wonderful, good size for a, you know, I would say lots of those. But
I would like to see, I would like us to consider reducing the minimum lot size in area 5 to encourage infill development.
Area 4?
and
Five.
No, I heard for 5.
Yeah.
I was just asking area 4 because I know, like, I think Mike, you were mentioning area 4 perhaps for reduced lot sizes.
I say the same there.
Yeah, I think we should do it town-wide.
The nice thing about Area 5 is that almost everything in there is walkable. Area 4 is somewhat isolated, like, you know, unless there's going to be development of services in that area, I don't see a huge draw for density in Area 4.
There have
there's
been efforts to get the sidewalk extended to that area, and
That's still
But where do you walk to?
no, I know. I mean,
Like, there's
Yeah.
a guy who lives.
My buddy.
There's a father who has 2 daughters that are in school with my daughter, and they live on Fairgrounds Road, and like, he walks like to school and back. Like, I feel for the guy. Like, in the middle of winter, like walking with his kids and his dog, like that's not something that
that guy
anybody.
walks
We
loud.
should not be encouraging that.
Yeah,
Like,
black coat in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Almost hit him several times.
yeah, I know. He's a nice guy. His kids are great. Like, it's not a walk we should be encouraging.
No, not at all.
No, which is my biggest concern of putting anything on
Yeah.
Tenny.
Yeah.
Like
I
that,
mean, unless there are services there that people want to walk to, like Main Street's great. Like bars, restaurants, the
Like-
Monkey, like school, like
I agree. And if that's why I
or
am
sorry,
encouraging
not
one.
just Main Street, but Area 5, like
Yeah.
the older part, the downtown that's walkable. You know, it's a great place to live and walk. It's very desirable for families with kids, especially if they want pedestrian access to school.
Which is another reason why I think one is such a great development opportunity, because
Sure.
I've been to too many ski areas. They build destination resort. It'll become its own walkable neighborhood
On
if
its
he
own.
does it
Yeah.
the way most other ski areas are.
There is no he at this point for this multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They-
And my only reticence there, and I truly wish them the best for their sake and the town's sake, is that over many decades, they've had a hard time redeveloping, and I truly hope they succeed this time around.
Yeah.
But I'm also a little bit reticent to put too many eggs in that basket.
The only thing that I say is give them the opportunity.
Yes.
By providing them all of the, like, essentially take the leash off and not worry about all the other crazy amounts of fine detail stuff. Let them see what they can do. Because that's always been their biggest problem, is because they're like, oh, I want to build, 25 units in one spot. And everybody, the only way to do it up until we heard about the overlay was to change it for all of the ag zone. And everybody in the ag zone's like, whoa.
Snow is also
mean,
an issue.
Yeah, but ski areas don't make money from skiing. Ski areas make money from concerts and venues and mountain biking and all those things. That's not, the snow's, limited for what they actually do.
I might make one comment that, I don't know if it's zoning that's affected Tenny for all the years, but when I moved to Plymouth, I had a buddy that worked at the mountain, and they said, here's your paycheck, you don't have to cash it right off. They've been having money problems all the way back into the 80s, so hopefully it changes today, but
But it's more of
years.
money. Ski areas historically make their money on real estate, which is why Loon is as successful as it is because it sells $1 million homes on the mountain that people are willing to buy for second homes.
And that's what
And-
Plymouth needs.
They mountain bike during the summers, and they have beer festivals and those things. I believe it's an opportunity to at least see where they go. And I agree with Phil that, like, I am all for shrinking up and allowing people to do whatever. We can't talk density and then worry about 5-foot setbacks or 10-foot setbacks. We have to allow them to develop within reason and shrink some of the lot sizes so that we can have that walkable neighborhood in a walkable neighborhood area.
I think the other thing that comes up specifically with Area 5 is so many of the lots the existing lots are non-conforming that,
Yes.
even doing something on an existing lot is a challenge because of the non-conforming issues. Reducing the minimum lot size so that more existing lots are conforming makes things easier. There's significant opportunity for infill development, in areas that, take a 2-acre lot with a bunch of frontage and you can put, where there's one house, you can now put 3 houses. Like, there's, and it's not, you don't mandate it, but you provide the opportunity. And it's very fitting with the character of that neighborhood as it is.
Exactly.
So I'm going to say we're at about a half hour now, and I think this has been productive, and I think we all have some more to think about. And when we start talking more about overlays and other kind of incentives we might want to give, then we can revisit this map and after some reflection, return to this map again at another meeting.
John, maybe this might be a good opportunity if someone in the audience wants to speak for a couple minute or two.
Yeah, if anybody wants to make a brief statement, I can certainly open us to brief public comments. Can you come up to the, you know the drill. Yes, please.
David Kent, I live in Zone 5 and have for the last,
Area 5, it's not a zone yet.
Area 5, and have for a long time. First of all the time I've lived in Plymouth, there is not a build it and they will come situation. It really depends on the market. And you can't fight the market by simply creating opportunity. There has to be a demand. Second, I think we're in an inflection point. This is my personal view. I think we're in an inflection point relative to supply and demand in town, where we don't know where we're going next. The college, university, has gobbled up a lot of single-family houses, and that's, I will say, as a citizen, that's really annoyed me. Because they've displaced a lot of families in this town who sent kids to the school, who could walk to school, or could walk downtown and shop. We don't have a grocery store down there like we did before. So it's in a state of flux now. If you, I know you're talking about your minimum lot size changing to make things more conforming. If you allow building to take place, I'm concerned about you creating a ghetto with what's left when the college kids leave. The investors pull back, or have to pull back, or go broke from the vacant housing that's left remaining. And that bothers me. The only other thing I heard which really tweaks me is and you're going to talk about later, I guess, is the parking issue. I couldn't agree any more than with Mike about, it's the number one issue in terms of development in Plymouth is the problems we have with parking. And on the zoning board, I hear it all the time. I want to put in 15 spaces because I got 15 college kids living here, and they're only supposed to have 5 under the current thing. And it's a huge problem. I don't know how you solve it, but I do know it's a huge problem. And just to give it, to let people do whatever they want, like the Wild West, I think is a mistake. It's got to be rules that can be followed and can be enforced. That's all I got to say. I'll probably have more later after you talk about the zoning amendments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So, yeah, we're going to talk about the zoning amendments now. Actually, we don't really have amendments, we have some recommendations to work through so we can eventually get ourselves through some amendments. And we have a pretty long list here, and I've tried to cobble together some of my own list out of this as well, mostly following the groupings here, but in a few places where there was certain recommendations that fall into different kind of themes, I tried to lump them together a little bit. So I'd like to go through these and start with some of the ones that were mostly kind of like green lit already on to go forward, and then move into some of the harder ones. I think the ADUs, for example, were mostly on board, and I just want to kind of just clarify, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with our planning and they can kind of take our guidance. There was the fact that the ADUs are listed in our zoning ordinance as workforce housing, which is not necessarily, well, it's not correct by the letter of the law, and many of them do fit that, but they don't necessarily fit that. So we want to correct that, and I think we all agreed last time that that was a good thing to do. No? Okay. Parking reduction, 1 space mandated per ADU rather than the current 2, which gives us like 4 spaces per lot with an ADU, which is a lot. If we have 1 space per ADU, since they're limited in capacity anyway, that would make sense. Is there any disagreement with that? Mike? I see you're thinking.
Which,
Brain.
I'm going a little bit out of order here. I figured we start here since we had some broad agreement. Topic number 2, yeah, page 4.
Topic 2, page 4.
So rather than 2 parking spaces per ADU, have this 1 per ADU, and still the others for the primary dwelling as well. If they want to have 4, they can, but at the minimum, just have 1.
I have no problem with that.
Okay,
Are
I'm just gonna leave that for, what's that?
Are we opening ourselves up for potential issues with just reducing the parking space to 1 per ADU without tying that to a bedroom number? Or
I don't think so, given the size of ADUs, and I don't see an issue there. If anybody else does.
Even if there was a 3-bedroom ADU, you might only need 1 parking spot. If it's a, you know,
Not a big issue.
single parent, 2 kids kind of thing.
And if they decide they want more and aren't going over the maximum, like, impervious surfaces, they can do that.
Do it.
And it's a minimum, it's not a maximum.
That's right, that's right.
So what is the reason to,
That's what I was thinking.
to even do anything with?
Because some spaces wouldn't be able to put 3 cars or 4 cars.
Having 4
They
spaces.
have to have 2 cars for their house plus 2 cars for an ADU, and
Prohibits
mom's
you.
moving in with 1 car because they couldn't fit it on their lot. Now they can't put an ADU in because it mandates that they have space for 4 vehicles when they only have 2.
And what if they, even if they don't like, you know, what if they just want more green space and like parking spaces and they don't need the extra space?
Because they want to live in town. and
This
walk.
gives them more flexibility to have fewer spaces if they don't want those spaces. They can still put the 4th one in or whatever, or 5th or whatever if they have space for it.
It just seems so weird when, when we already have people parking all over the lots. I really am looking forward to a lot of input from the folks that live in these, in this section, to see what their input. And maybe they like the idea, and I understand why we're talking about it now, but I just can't wait to get more input from the folks that it would affect.
I would just use the example that I used in our meeting. You know, I have a friend that would love to put in an accessory dwelling unit in a garage in the back of his yard. And he wouldn't have enough space to be able to get accepted for the ADU because he only has enough space for 2 cars. So,
And there may not be
Yeah.
any pushback at all.
Yeah.
I don't live in in an area that would even have to think about something like that. But, yeah, I'm looking forward to the input.
Okay. So I mean, I think it would be good to like look at the language for that and kind of move forward. And if ultimately we decide to table it, we can. But and the other thing, which is actually slightly different than what's in this sheet here, is there was some discrepancy in whether an ADU is allowed by right or by conditional use permit. And I think here it pushes one direction. I think the rest of the board has been pushing towards allowing them by right, rather than having them come before the planning board each and every time for a conditional use permit, as we saw a lot of this summer.
Well, we never, the planning board never saw any of those. I believe it was just the code enforcement officer would sign off, or the planner would sign off, and then sometime around when June Hammond came on board, they started.
Well, currently in our zoning ordinance, it's a little bit unclear, but it does say at some point you're supposed to come in for a conditional use permit, which is what we've been doing. And we wanted to make it consistent in both places. And I think the agreement has been among the planning board members, we'd rather see it by right. Yeah? Okay. So I think we're ready to go with that and kind of move forward with the ADU issues. There's the open space residential issues, which are on, where is that?
Page 5, I think.
Topic 3.
yeah, open space, topic 3.
Open space, there it is, yeah, topic number 3. There was a simple administrative change of just changing the name. It says cluster in one place, open space in the other, makes perfect sense. Some of the other issues, and I'd be curious to hear from the members here as well as Barrett Planning. There's adjusting minimum setbacks, providing a little bit more guidance about what you get more specifically, I think, for doing an open space development, and also putting in more guidelines about what that open space actually entails. I think we as a board could argue about the finities of or niceties of what that actually means. I'm personally willing to go with common best practices and just kind of, lots of other people have done this and just kind of do whatever works somewhere else, and if we don't like that for Plymouth, we can talk about that, but as a first step, that would make sense to me. There's a lot of these around, and a lot of them are better written than ours, and I'd be happy to just, like, at least as a first draft, to say, like, let's borrow from somebody else that works well,
Let's take a look at it.
instead of trying to reinvent it from scratch.
Right. There are lots of examples. Beg, borrow, and steal.
Such a huge amount of work to do, and so many different things that we're trying to make work. I was sitting next to Judy when the applicant came forward with their open space for their development. And at first, Judy and I had the same reaction. What? And on the map, it looked really odd that it was just this little part on the outside. And then when we actually got into the meat of the applicant's proposal, it was a walking trail around the entire property that then finished at a play area in a little beach area with a little pond. And I thought, oh my God, they are right on with how they did this. I was really impressed. I don't know if Judy changed her feeling after we realized what exactly it was, but I don't think it's broken, and maybe we don't need to fix it.
I will let Judy answer that, but I would just say beforehand that because it worked in one instance, does not mean it would work in another instance if we're not specific in our regulations.
I just don't think we've had any call that there's a problem with it, that's all.
What's the concern? That people are using every ounce of their property and there's no open space?
No, I think there's a few concerns. One is the question of what a developer actually gets by setting aside that open space. There's a lot of leeway given to the planning board, which is good, but it also leaves a lot of uncertainty for the developer in approaching the planning board, because there isn't much sense of what the planning board is actually willing to give up in terms of density bonuses or whatever, and setbacks and all of that. So if we could be more specific about that, a developer can say, that's what I'm gonna get, this is what my plan should look like, as opposed to just kind of going in blind.
Because the town of Plymouth requires them to have open space? Is that
It's an option.
It's an option.
It's a specific type of
So
development.
if this is an option,
It's statute. So, yeah, sorry.
No,
Like, the basic concept is if you have 2 acre minimum lot sizes and the developer comes to you with a 20 acre lot, they say that you can put in 10 2-acre lots. Or they can put in 10 1-acre lots and 10 acres of open space. And then their infrastructure costs are reduced because they don't have as much of a road, they don't have as much utilities. You're still providing a benefit by providing open space it
Shared
has
and
to be protected and deeded and stuff, not future development, but like, there are benefits both ways, but it's not a requirement, it's an option.
it's an option. So all we're trying to do is come up with wording for an option that allows them to know ahead of time.
So you get-
Suitability
you-
of the
you-
open space.
you
You can't just make it all the wetlands.
It's a no-brainer.
It's a suitability open space, and you get to build more densely tighter together if you set aside that open space, but there's not a lot of guidance right now in terms of
And you said that it's
what
in
that looks
two
like.
different names. In one thing, it's named
the
this,
same
and
thing. We
it's the
just-
same thing, but two different names? Yeah.
Cluster or open space.
And that's the easy part, you just fix that. But in terms of what the actual regulations look like, there probably could be some more specific guidance.
Yeah.
I mean, for a
Makes
developer coming in, you're like, well, what is the planning board actually gonna give me? And this would actually provide a little bit more.
That's,
Judy, did you have a?
No, I think we were just talking about trying to make the qualitative standards better,
Yeah.
because we really don't have any.
yeah.
And really just bring it up to speed, just up to best practices, for lack of a better phrase.
And I'm not against it, I'm just thinking we've got a lot on our plate, that's all.
Sounds like something Judy's gonna do for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably should be a fairly easy sell compared to some of the other things you're talking about.
So one of the other things we're talking about, which has a lot of benefits in various ways, is to limiting sprawl and having targeted density in certain parts of town, whether that be through overlays or just reducing dimensional requirements, is to think about dimensional requirements. In Area 5, we've been talking about it a lot, but also potentially in other areas as well. And there seemed to be a lot of yes in principle here, that we want to do this, and a little bit of kind of vagueness in terms of what that actually looks like in practice and numbers and such at this point. And
What's this one on?
this actually covers a few different numbers here. It starts on page 1 with incentives for sprawl. It continues with density on the next page. It comes in a few different places because it hits in various themes here, various dimensional requirements. So for example, we were just talking about lot sizes and reducing lot sizes in single and multifamily residential based on water and sewer. And potentially elsewhere as overlays, for example. And I think we had some numbers for, was it quarter acre on water and sewer and
10,000 square feet.
10,000 square feet? Yeah,
So just under a quarter acre.
yeah. And
I think is what we discussed.
so we feel comfortable with that in the kind of the 5 area, right? And then leaving the lot sizes otherwise, if they're not on water and sewer, as they are? Is that
Yeah,
right?
we had discussed pretty much 5, so all multifamily, all single family, on water and sewer. And then any SFR not on water and sewer would stay at 1, I think it was, right?
Wouldn't it just be town-wide? If you get town water and town sewer, you get to reduce?
And that's what I'm thinking now, we discussed that, but now that we've been sitting here talking about like the potential of 4, up in 4, whether it's water and sewer there, maybe we discussed doing it in different areas as well.
What Phil had suggested is that, I like the idea, we can't talk about density and not allow infill, perfect example, gentleman in the office, in the audience said, what happens when the university pulls back? I manage a house at 25 Russell. That's a huge property. It's a 5,000 square foot, farmhouse with a 10,000 square foot barn. Who's going to buy that? It's a large lot that could be broken into 2 or 3 small small homes, all on water and sewer. I would love for that to be an option. Problem is right next door is 23 Russell. 23 Russell sits on almost both sides, like on one side, sits on its.
And we'll talk about setbacks in a moment. So I think, it seems like yes, absolutely to within 5. And maybe elsewhere in water and sewer, and that might be an overlay issue that we can think about perhaps for maybe 1, maybe 5, 4. And there seems to be more reticence on the Tenny Mountain Highway area.
If I can address the concept you're getting at, it kind of goes back to the Area 5 and the density thing. I think maintaining a single-family home is one thing. When you have an older home that's been used for apartments, there's no salvaging that building. They should be raised. And I think having zoning, you're not going to reconvert these homes that have been college housing into single-family homes ever again.
Well,
You might
Depends
as well
on which
tear them
ones.
down.
There are some, because as of right now,
I want to come back to this conversation because we actually we have the RSA 79E where some of that stuff conversation can come back.
I think as long as we're providing opportunities, economically viable opportunities for people to do new construction in that area, I think
give them
that's my long-term
at higher
goal.
density,
Yeah.
at higher density.
And we can let the developers decide if they
Right.
think it's worth it to redevelop an existing building or raise it, as you say, or not. It's not really our choice to make.
No, it's not, but.
And they've had the opportunity.
But if there's no commercially viable opportunity to do new construction in those areas, you're just gonna see continued redevelopment of those properties as something that doesn't benefit the town.
Good points, Phil.
So that seems like we have something to go with, definitely in that area, and maybe in overlays elsewhere as well, with lot sizes. One of the issues that wasn't completely resolved, again, we're kind of yes in principle, but what does it actually look like, is the setbacks in the front setbacks, whether we choose a across the board 15 or 20 foot setback, or whether we do it by averages of nearby properties. And
But that comes
I
back
think
to the
either one
density
would
that
be-
Phil and I've been talking about.
I think either one would be better than what we have now. I'm probably leaning towards, personally, a 15 or 20 foot like default, but if others feel more inclined towards the average, I'd be okay with that as well.
I don't like the concept of an average only because it's more complicated to implement. If somebody's looking at, you know, the simpler it is, the easier it's gonna be for people
How
to
close is your
invest.
house? Literally live on a postage stamp. What's your setback at your house?
I've never actually measured it.
Measure it.
It's probably like 12 feet or something.
I bet you it's smaller than that. I bet you it's smaller than that. There are some houses that literally, 10 winter, I have an 8-foot setback
Front,
on the front.
yeah. Is that,
8
is
feet
that
from-
from curb? or-
That's from the edge of the sidewalk to my front door. And the right side literally sits on
The property.
the property line. So
So by doing this, we'd be bringing a whole lot of more properties, not all of them,
Into
into conformity.
into conformity.
Yeah.
Not all, but a lot more. And we'd allow new buildings, anything that came down that it wasn't reconstructed in a year, that couldn't use the existing footprint or whatever, all of them to also,
To build again.
yeah.
Yeah.
I say go as small as we feel comfortable for a setback, only because we're talking about density. And there's no number that we're gonna throw out that I can't point to a house in town that meets that currently
So
within our town. Like,
are we leaning towards either a 15 or 20 rather than an average then?
I'm
I
leaning
would- I
towards
would-
like a 10.
I would, yeah, but I'd rather have it be a hard number, not an average of.
Yeah, that'd be difficult.
I would avoid the average.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
I'd
you
say
know,
as low as,
surveying it.
I'd say 10 would not be, you would find at least 40 houses in the village area that have a 10
I
foot
think
setback
if you
now.
made a 10 though in the single family residential as a whole, or even on water and sewer, you're gonna get more pushback because this also has to pass.
But we're only talking
Or-
about people building new houses, so that means one of the houses has to go away and someone has to come in and decide to build in the community. All we're giving them is the opportunity. We're not doing this right away. How many of these houses
Well, it's
are
not
gonna be
gonna-
torn down,
It's not like next year all of a sudden, yeah.
right? Like, that's why I say, let's go with as close to what we have in our neighborhoods now and go with that number. I may be wrong that they're 10 feet, but you go down Wentworth,
yeah.
they're pretty close to the road
On one side.
on one
The-
side,
the other
and on
side's
the other
further away,
side's
yeah.
further.
But
But
I'm looking at that street on Wentworth. Those lots are almost all like there's 0.13 to the big one's 0.2 acres. So none of those would even meet the quarter acre lot size.
Even
that
the
we're
quarter acre.
proposing. Like, but it's a nice area. Like
It is. It's a wonderful
I
area.
considered buying a couple houses in that stretch, and when we were looking for homes, like I would have been happy living
So
there.
what, do we have I mean, we can still change the actual number as we go forward. So it seems like we're going for a number, and you say 10.
I say 10.
10 might be pushing it for some of the people who actually have to pass
So
this,
let,
but-
so let have a conversation.
Yeah.
But if you start with 20, you've eliminated whole neighborhoods that already meet that standard. We're talking density. We are literally having a conversation where we're saying, let's increase density, and then we're making decisions that's reducing the density.
And just bringing stuff into conformity as well.
And it brings things into conformity.
Can I just
Will,
real
yeah.
quickly drop in a little bit of clarification?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry, so typically in the lot averaging, the setback averaging, what it would do is it's not an either or, it's both. It's what you do is you establish a minimum for everyone, 15 feet, or you can opt into using the average of the surrounding lots instead. That way, because, it would be way too much work, every time something came before you had to, pull all the houses and 600 feet to determine the lot average. So that would be our recommendation if that was, either way, if you wanted to do the lot averaging, it wouldn't be just the lot averaging. It would be, you'd have to take 10 or 15 foot, and then that averaging would give you the option to opt smaller based on kind of what's around you.
Okay.
That would actually,
mind that.
that would work, yeah. So we would say like 15 then maybe, and then you can average smaller?
Yeah.
I'd love to see I'd like to see on a tour a space that's 15, because then you have something to point to. When it's like, oh, 15 is really small, you can be like, well, these 10 houses that we can see are 15.
Oh, actually, can I actually completely change the subject for a moment? And actually, as chair, I can.
You're the chair.
Just to be polite. Speaking of on a tour, I wanted to mention this. So at our next business session, we don't have any applications. And rather than cancel, since we have a lot of work to do, we have a couple of options. One of which is to keep discussing all this stuff, which would be helpful. But the other is we were talking about on the committee of doing walking tours. And we were thinking of using that time, since we already have a public meeting scheduled anyway, to actually take a walk. Does that make sense?
I love that.
Okay. I just wanted to, anybody disagree?
No.
Okay. Unless it's like pouring, in which case we can look at these. All right. Sorry, just to get us off track for a moment. Thank you, Will, for the clarification.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you for that.
And we also seemed like we were all on board with the parking setback of 5 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I,
I don't even,
I
I'm
saw
going
it
out of
there.
order, I'm sorry.
you're going off your list instead of on here. Parking, topic 4, so page 5.
Is it in that section now?
No, it's not. Never mind. Wrong. That's
Continued on page 6, I think.
Well, anyway, so,
Bottom of page 6.
oh, there it is, yeah. Topic number 4,
yeah. It's in the
Yeah.
green on the bottom
allow
of page
parking within
6.
5 feet. So we're all on board with that, we can keep going forward with that. We had a green from the last one anyway already. And,
But again, not to 5 feet. Do you know how many driveways still will not meet the 5 feet?
and I think if we get closer to conformity and closer to allowing for that, I think we're in good shape. And if in a few years we want to revisit that, whatever, but I think this gets us a lot closer to where we want to be.
We can't make every existing property conforming, but
I-
at the same time, I mean, there's still a variance or a special exception process for
Because
those.
on High Street, there's 4 houses on High Street that literally have their driveway 6 inches, a chain link fence, 6 inches, and a driveway.
And there's a lot of those, and I think if we bring it to 5 feet, we're setting ourselves on a good path forward, even if not everything's in conformity. I think it's still a good place.
What
to be.
was it before? Just curious.
Side setbacks are
15,
15, I think.
30 front, 15 side.
I
and
think,
rear.
yeah. And, yes,
I'm gonna go, but can I just make a couple of comments?
you may, yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's really online, so
The,
except for Barrett Planning.
But we are recording.
Sorry. Oh, right. Good point.
the parking issue. One of the problems is people will come in perhaps and destroy old houses and put something new in. When people come to the board, the zoning board, and they ask for a special exception because they want to be closer, or a variance, they want to be close to the property line, the neighbor that's there now looks at what's going on, doesn't object. Once that neighborly building is cut down, now it's going to be too close to what the person wants to do on their lot. And that creates a problem. Because you've got to think about what is this going to become in the future? And so there's one problem with neighborly input sometimes is going to create a problem. Don't give up the right of the neighbor to object to what somebody's trying to do on their lot. And by just creating something where anybody can come in and it's automatically going to work, because it may have a bad effect. We've got one right here on Highland Street that I'm struggling with. We said, no, you can't do that. They do it anyway. Our problem has always been too many cars on a lot rather than one. It's the other end of the problem. All over the lawns, there's no enforcement. And you can say, oh, well, we'll enforce it. Don't create things that are unenforceable. So those are my two things. Don't cut the neighbor out of the decision process, and think about parking really hard. It is a beast of a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. I appreciate what you've done here.
This is hard work. I appreciate what the housing committee is doing,
It has been a lot.
and the planners.
Thank you.
You're not in the crowd-pleasing business.
And lastly, on dimensional issues, there's the frontages, and along with the other dimensional changes, reducing frontages potentially. And I think there's another place where we have a yes in principle. Personally, I'd be willing to defer to you all at Barrett Planning to make some recommendations, and then we can talk about those later. Unless anybody has any very strong feelings about particular numbers and frontages. But I'd be willing to defer on this to you all, and then we can take a look at what you come up with.
Which one is that?
It's just part of the dimensional stuff. It's like, I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry. Again, the dimensional stuff is kind of spread in different places because it hits different issues. I tried to pull it all together.
Potentially page 2 all the way at the bottom.
I just think that we need a lot of input from the folks that live, that will be affected. That's my,
Okay.
I think input is good, but I think we shouldn't be afraid to propose things. And the input that really only matters is the input we get on election day.
So some, and I will say
To a point. I mean, we do our best to
part of this, I'll just briefly address it. I don't want to get bogged down in talking about input. Part of the wonderful thing about getting a large grant to do this is we've been doing outreach for like a year now and getting lots of input, and we continue to get input. And at every stage in this process, we've been engaging with as many members of the public as possible to see what everybody is interested in and what their needs are and so on and so forth. And we will continue to do that. Even though at some level it is the board's decision to take that input and do something with it. So I do have parking on the agenda here, and I've got some other kind of density things to think about with multifamily housing and units per acre, that sort of stuff. And then we have some of these broader issues with districts and inclusionary zoning and that sort of thing, which we'll get to in a bit. Parking, it is a contentious issue. So I have a couple of things I just want to say here. One of the things we've talked about is reducing the minimum size of parking spaces to 9 by 18, and there's been some pushback about this already, and it reduces the length of a parking space by a foot. And my personal thought here is, given the amount we gain for this and the potential for an argument about this, I say we table this at this point and not really push forward on that one.
It's a guy that would benefit. I have no problem whatsoever with reducing what a size of a parking spot is. And I drive like an F-150, right? Like, it's going to increase the amount of space within inside a parking lot. It's going to open green spaces, because if they're required 8 spots for their cars, and they can make those 8 spots smaller on the footprint of the property, like,
Just means the building's bigger.
just means the building's bigger, right?
I mean,
Like,
mean
more
there's more
livable
green
space.
space.
More livable space.
I will say, I agree with this change in principle. I've heard some pushback already, though, and it doesn't gain us a whole lot. But if other people want to go forward with it, I was just trying to avoid an argument about this since it wasn't a huge gain.
I'm
But
okay with that.
I'm also okay with going forward with it if we want to go forward with it.
No, that's fine. I don't care. I just don't see the.
There are still a lot of big trucks around.
Yeah.
I mean, and the truck fits in the,
My last truck is 22 feet long.
think
most
that's the
vehicles
only
will
thing
fit
people
in that
drive around
8
here.
by
That's
18-foot space, but
Yeah.
it's not like you have a crane to drop it in there.
I just don't imagine.
You gotta get in there.
So all the trucks are going to look like theirs in the future, anyways. It's just going to be just like this tiny. it's
And I
just
have
gonna
a
fit.
quick little thing. I have every imaginable tool that's operated by battery. I have a battery operated lawnmower. I love all my battery. I have 4 sawzalls by battery. But you know, getting into a smaller battery car, I'm probably not ready for that. I embrace it, but I don't know if it's there. Maybe Will comes from an area that has a lot of small cars, but not in Plymouth.
So let's say this.
That's fine.
I
I didn't realize
table
it was
it
so
for
contentious.
now.
I won't.
I would
Have
love
that
to see
one
it
wire.
in a document as a further recommendation to consider maybe in a future year when we don't have a whole lot of other stuff that's contentious to think about. But for now, for this year, let's put it on hold and on the back burner, and maybe in the future kind of come back to it. I mean, I personally kind of agree, but I also don't want to like start a fight about a foot of a parking space.
Yeah, it's
Um,
probably not the highest priority thing we're facing.
So, there's the whole 125% issue.
Where are we now on this?
What page are we?
Oh,
6 topic.
it's in the parking area, parking. And I know some of this we seem to be okay with, some of it we said not now. I think it's an issue we do have to deal with, and we may or may not deal with it this year. I would love to get recommendations on this, regardless of whether we tackle it this year or another year. And just something to kind of deal with that, like nothing over, nothing less than 125%, and how that all works out. It needs to be dealt with. And if we have the stomach for it this year or not, I'm not sure.
Really, that was put in for student housing.
No, I know.
Like, to stop the concerns of million cars in the lots.
Yeah.
Like,
I think it's going to be like at some point this year, we're going to have to draw the line at what we can deal with in 1 year. And I may or may not hit that light, but I'd still like to see some recommendations there.
I can say you can table that because there's absolutely no way that more student housing is going to be created off campus.
When you say table it, you mean like change it, or you
No,
mean,
I'm just saying like,
no, don't even deal with it.
like, because right now, everybody's had that argument, they put it in, and there is no one right now that's going to be building or buying houses to increase the number of student housing off campus. And that's the only thing that addresses, is student housing off campus.
It also impacts other commercial uses, which is not what we're talking about in the housing study
Yeah.
anyway.
But for housing,
Yeah.
that's like, we are reducing, there's been 9 homes that have gone from student housing back to residential. And that's just in the last year, right? Like, they're just gonna keep, all of these houses are gonna just keep going back to single-family homes because, or duplex rentals to families, et cetera, just because the number of students living off campus is reducing. And that's, just part of it.
So I think I'd love, even for the future, if not this year, to get some guidance on that. And I was curious, mentioned in here, in a similar section, where was that? It's the first one in the parking requirements on topic number 4. Amend parking requirements to reduce parking requirements in VC, CI, ICD, and MFR districts for multifamily dwellings where walking is more common. Do you have any specific recommendations there?
Page 5.
I don't have any specific numbers. We were hoping to get some guidance from the planning board
Okay.
on those numbers. If we were going to do something immediately, what it might be worth suggesting is right now it's 1.5 for the first bedroom. It could be something as simple as reducing that to 1 for the first bedroom and then increasing from there, so it reduces you by a single parking spot. And it's also one thing that might be useful in this is this is a slightly different recommendation, but just providing some clarification on when you have fractional parking requirements, because you do have that 0.5 requirement. There could be a little bit of flexibility that the planning board or the ZBA could give in that, if it comes out to a half, you could specify if that means rounding up or rounding down.
Or if there's, you just talked about turning the 0.5 into something different anyway. Maybe we could just remove the fractions altogether, or have more guidance in how to deal with the fractions.
Yes.
And so here is something like where, in principle, personally, I'd love to see a reduction in the mandatory number of minimum parking spaces. At the same time, Mike's probably thinking already, like, reducing minimum parking spaces, this is going to exacerbate the parking problem. Maybe you're not thinking that.
Potentially.
I just look at homes that might have had one car back in the 50s, two in the 1970s, and now you got anybody who's 16 years or older used to ask the dad for the car keys. Now they got their own extra car. It's changed, and it's not going to go down.
I have 14 cars, so I can't.
Maple Street is full of cars with single car garages and narrow driveways and one car parked on the grass. It's just the way it was built.
So I mean, I imagine there's going to be some pushback here if we go forward with this. Not the clarification of the fractional issue, but with reducing the number of parking spaces. I know there's going to be pushback.
That's just for multifamily, correct, Will?
Yes, that was aimed at the multifamily. I think it's pretty standard everywhere that, you know, if you have a single family, two spots.
Right.
I mean, I kind of agree with this in principle. I do imagine there's going to be some pushback, though.
Yes. From the person who owns most of the houses, multifamily, just saying.
So at this point, do members of the board, do we want guidance on this further? Do we want to just not do it this year, maybe another year, or not do it at all? Thoughts?
I don't think it's broken.
I think we pull it off. It seems like parking is like a very touchy subject, so if you're trying to get some of these larger things through, I think
So let's cut it.
that's my theory, because you know, you guys have done a lot of great work, but there's a lot on here.
There is.
So the idea that we're gonna,
Evening's
I
young.
mean, how many, you know, in March, how many votes are we gonna ask people to vote on?
Well, and some of these
And-
things, I'm sorry to interrupt. Some of these things, while we have this project going, we might get guidance for issues that might take us into the following year as well,
Right.
even after this project's over.
Totally agree.
So we might not do all of this year, but even if we have some input and some guidance, that could be really helpful.
Absolutely. I would just suggest that maybe, you know, you focus on like your top 10 for this year, not try to get 25.
Yeah.
Be my, and then maybe anyways, it gets confusing. Even as we flip back and forth between all the pages here, John.
Sorry for not, yeah.
We should go just by this, because no one else has that.
No, I know. I'm sorry.
Yes, which one is it?
I kind of followed some of this. So
Not really.
Debatable.
So right now, I'm moving on to the section that is unit density limitations and recommendations, which is topic number 1, which is quite an extensive topic. So I think a simple one, I hope, which is, where is this on here?
First page.
No, I'm just looking at, do we want to allow multifamily by right in the, get this, the multifamily district?
No question, move on.
Okay. Any objection to that?
No.
Okay. Good. It seemed like we were willing to allow for attached single-family dwellings as a new definition in our ordinance and to consider them in certain areas of town.
This will be important, I think.
What's that?
This will be important to have this in there, I think.
You think that's a good thing?
I do.
I think we should basically treat it like, I don't see it distinctly different as for multifamily, honestly.
It's the separate entrance.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I mean, from the way the zoning treats it,
Shouldn't be.
I don't see a need for.
In terms of,
Maybe the planners have a recommendation.
I would say in terms of like a community style and character, it starts to look more like a townhouse sort of thing often, as opposed to a multi-unit building. And we might, either now or in the future, think about those sorts of housing types as distinct and where we'd like to encourage them. Or maybe we wouldn't, I don't know.
But John, isn't that allowed already? I mean, we see that on Tenny Mountain. We see it, I don't know where else, but Tenny Mountain has that.
It would be interesting to pull these out just so we can think more specifically about this. And since we do have them, and they are kind of different than typical multifamily, it might, I mean, Phil's saying, I understand what you're saying, that they're not in some ways, but in some ways they are distinct. I don't know if you guys want to.
That's a good question for us.
I remember talking to Joseph about building one of these, and he had, where he was walking me through the ordinances, there was some confusion that wasn't significantly clear because things were at different, like, because each unit had its own entrance.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly what it was off the top of my head, but I remember there being a little bit of confusion with, like, it overlaid into a couple different things.
Was that, it had to have been over off of Fairgrounds on,
Oh no, it was like the potential of like, hey, this is what someone wants to build.
Wants to
And it's,
build? Gotcha.
Yeah, and there was a lack of clarification given back.
Aren't all the units at Blueberry Hill attached single family?
So
with different entrances and they don't go through a common?
can I ask members of our planning, who might have a better answer for this, what the benefit actually is of attached single family as a distinct entity from multifamily?
So one thing,
Can you hear me, John?
Yeah,
yeah, we can,
Can you hear me all right?
yes.
Yeah, because my video was frozen, so that's why I turned mine off. Typically, attached single family, sometimes called townhouse, is just regulated differently in terms of number of units allowed in a building. Typically, the design standards are different. It's just a different type of structure. It's intended more for homeownership than for rental. That's just the nature of the product type.
Judy, do
So
you?
it doesn't- if you define it, then you can regulate it differently. You can kind of tailor recommendations for the use as opposed to treating it as any other type of multifamily, because they really are different buildings.
right, and I think that's kind of the main point we talked about in August, was if you at least define it as a use, you can create different standards for it, whereas right now, you may have you have plenty of examples of townhouses in your community, but they would have had to follow the, whatever is outlined for multifamily, because that's all it can be counted as.
I have 3 units right in a row. Everybody walks right up to the front, right next to each other. I treat it as a multifamily. There's 3 units, and they're rented.
If we are thinking of adopting more guidelines for multifamily, and if one of the things that we're talking about is if we are thinking about higher density and multifamily buildings and such, we might want, and there's a lot of agreement, certainly in the housing committee about this, want stricter design guidelines so we can maintain the character even if we increase density. And what those design guidelines look like for a attached single family is different than a multifamily. That's not about right for what we were talking about as a committee?
Yes.
I personally would like to see some language that would define that and see where it goes. And I think especially if we do start to define our design guidelines, we've started to already in our site plan review regulations for multifamily, but if we really kind of push that a little bit further to think about, if we do increase density, maintaining the character of the town and being more stringent in guidelines, then at some point we probably do have to distinguish a attached single family from a multifamily.
Yeah, I think they're gonna wanna do that, John. I mean, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that attached single family has to be for home ownership. I'm just saying that it is more likely to be built and sold for home ownership purposes. That's all I'm trying to say.
All the attached condos at Tenny Mountain are attached single family. I mean, there's anywhere I can think of that's been built in the past 40 years is all attached. Well, I mean, there are probably a few exceptions that aren't, but like.
I mean, I think the issue is, one of the things we're talking about is potentially, I know it's like a little bit of a contentious issue, but allowing for some greater density in certain areas. I mean, we all seem to want that. Well, what that means in terms of like,
Well, what it does
it's
is
like
Affordable.
like multifamily housing, for example. One of the things that we all seem to be on the committee, and thank you, in agreement with is that if we do go that direction, we want to have certain safeguards in place as to the character of the town.
perfect example will
And
be
in that case, we really are, once you start to define those design guidelines more, you really are thinking about different buildings, whereas now, if we aren't pushing that greater density anyway, those design guidelines aren't quite as much of an issue.
what's going to happen with my buildings when students leave. How am I going to bring to Russell, or because I have 9 buildings that have 6 apartments per the building. How do I then bring them into possible condo style, sell pieces off? How does that, inside the guidelines, that if we put hard in place, does it mean that they all have to be torn down? You just have to, I just want to make sure that there's a way in which, no matter what we decide, because some of them are literally to Russell. 2 of the apartments are accessed by a single front door. While the other 4 are all have their own entrance from the outside.
So I'm thinking here, Mike, do you have a comment first?
Well, I'm just thinking you are sitting pretty, Bruce, with that company, because there's so many opportunities for all of those large buildings. I can envision Spear going in and buying one, paying taxes on it, I hope, and putting employees in there.
They would.
And I know that's a pipe dream to think like
I think
that.
they own 4 houses that they pay taxes on.
They what?
They own 4 houses that they currently pay taxes on.
They do.
So,
The north side of Cumming Street.
So, I don't want to get too lost in individual properties right now. So I'm thinking, my take on this is I would like to see a definition for attached single family, and I would like to see some sense of guidance on what design guidelines might look like for multifamily and attached single family, since that is one of our issues. And
Definitions now.
I'd be open to seeing it, and if it got put in front of us, and I said, "Wow, this is going to give someone great clarity on great clarity on what the town wants," then I'd be more apt to be like, "Great, this is good." If it gets put in front of me, and I'm like, "Wow, this is so more restrictive and makes building this more of an issue," that's when it would just be
and this is
another
the thing.
discussion.
I think
So I think that-
it's hard to talk about in the abstract sometimes.
Yeah.
If we have something more specific to look at and like chew on, I think we might have more feedback.
So I got a question for Judy then. More density, so let's say you have a half-acre lot and it's completely empty and you want to build some sort of structure for housing. So you could do 6 units, I don't know, maybe you can't get permission for 6.5 acre in the multifamily, I don't know. But you could get 2 6-unit buildings on that half acre if you went with that type of building? I'm not sure how that looks.
It depends on what the lot area per unit requirement is for density. That's gonna determine how many units you can get on the lot, is what the density requirements are
So if you do,
for land area per unit.
so if you
Which
do,
may be very different, and usually is different, but doesn't have to be, but is usually different for attached single family versus multifamily versus single family. Depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but that's not a, that's a function of what the lot area per unit requirement is in the ordinance.
what is
And
Plymouth
Bill, just correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but there's no way currently you could build a 6-unit structure on a half acre. It works out to something like 4.8, I think, units per acre if you're on water and sewer.
Okay, that answers my question, thank you.
You would need like over an acre to build a 6-unit building.
Which gets me to my next thing I was actually wanted to talk about anyway, which is in thinking about certain areas, whether it be an overlay or multifamily or whatever, do we want to think about changing how we calculate units per acre or units per building? And do we have a preference of units per acre versus units per building, or is it a mixture of both? And that's a really big question, and I'm kind of curious how we feel about those sorts of issues kind of broadly, maybe even by district or potential overlay, or like, are we okay, and I'm asking this question knowing that the answer is going to be like complicated, are we okay with larger buildings, perhaps even larger than 6 units per building in certain areas targeted in town with certain design guidelines in place, as we saw with, some of the community outreach we did? Once it looked like something very particular,
In zone
people
1.
didn't actually mind it.
In zone 1, I don't believe that we should be doing mixed commercial and larger than 6 units anywhere else but zone, or anywhere else but that one,
The Tenny Mountain area.
the Tenny Mountain area. I just, for them to be able to do that, I'm fine with that. I have a problem with and I talked to Patty about this, you could easily fit 25 apartments in the building that was the book exchange. I know that you could. I toured it. We were going to buy it. Our company was going to buy it. That's 25 new residents on Main Street with parking the way it is. That makes me super anxious. I think 6 units, I have 9 buildings that have 6 units in them, and they're fine. I think they're fine. Just like she threw up that picture of a Victorian home that was condos with 6 units. You're right. I'm sure that's destined to be what's going to happen to 7 or 8 of the houses that were student housing that walk to campus zones at some point, if students completely disappear. But the reality is that if we open this door to more than 6 units, that means from the Flying Monkey down to, 6 Burner Bistro, there's an opportunity for them to level that and build, a ton of commercial space. Sounds great, except for where's the parking going to go for the commercial space? And they could fill within that space 40 more apartments. That's 40 more on top of the 20. It just becomes too much for the area.
I have a question about this. First, I have a comment. There are a whole bunch of things in that particular space you mentioned that I would love to see raised.
Yes.
There's not a lot downtown that I would, but that particular part you're talking about.
No, I know.
And now, I also wanted to say, if you did that with the current zoning in the Village Commercial, you'd actually gain a whole bunch of parking spaces, because some of those huge curb cuts that we have now where you can't park, you'd actually have a whole bunch more on-street parking. because those wouldn't be curb cuts anymore. And here's what I wonder. I kind of like the lack of mandated parking for units, yet residential units in the village commercial. And at the same time, I wonder if one way around this in new construction would actually be to mandate, if you're gonna build 10 units, provide parking for it. And it's up to you as a creative business person to figure out how to do that.
But they can't be on the sidewalk patrolling who's coming to go visit those 10 units. Because if someone's Netflixing, binging Netflix on a Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., and they want to invite a couple of buddies to go watch, it doesn't take too many of that happening to tie up all the parking in Plymouth.
And it's a good chance that some of those people are also going to buy some pizzas and some other things and support our businesses. And
that's why they're taking over Bruce's properties. Go ahead.
Alexis, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So Bruce, the stretch of Main Street that you mentioned, I don't know the stores well enough. Is that in the village commercial?
Yes.
Or is it? Yeah. So just to clarify, the section 5 that we put on the map, that is not covering village commercial. We didn't put anything. We weren't suggesting anything in village commercial. It was the multifamily and the single family. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
So.
All right. I still, the idea of six.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. My biggest concern is more than 6 units is just, it's a lot.
But what,
from someone who already manages all of the spaces in town that have more than 6 units, like, I can tell you that it's a concern for me that they would build, you open that up, I'm literally tearing my barn down and I'm putting, as many units in there as we are allowed to. Like, it just,
If I can share, so
Please.
one of the best things that I think has happened, like I drive, when I go to visit my parents, I drive through Ithaca, which is a college town. And one of the best things that happened there was there's a main street going out of town where there was a bunch of old homes that were historic student rentals falling into disrepair. A developer bought all of them, tore the whole thing down, built new apartments, beautiful, highly sought after, well done, and like sometimes that's what you need. Like it's a great development. They're the first places that fill up because the developer had an incentive to make an investment. He could buy all the homes that were renting for not much and weren't very desirable and put it brand new places, and they're the first places to fill up.
And the property value probably went up, which meant the tax revenue went up as well.
So were they, instead of taking the 3 of the buildings that might have had 2, 3, 4 apartments in them, he built one building, or he built a building for building?
Multiple buildings. But
So multiple
he may have
buildings.
had to go for a variance, but like it's basically a complex where there used to be individual single family houses. Like now there's a complex of multi-family buildings.
And that's allowed right now?
There's a health club. There are rental spaces for food service in there. Like
So you want that on
hybrid-
Russell
hybrid-
Street? You
I'm
want
just saying,
commercial on Russell?
Like,
Because that's literally the
There's
multifamily right
no
now.
need for commercial there. I'm just saying in this particular location it works, but you like
Or
there's-
South Main. And you can even put parking underneath.
No,
like
she
down the
just
hill.
said that wasn't part of the suggestion.
No, it's not, but we
So-
can talk about it.
But I think what Bruce, what
we shouldn't, my point is we shouldn't discount the potential for investment on a large scale.
And I would agree with that, because what Phil just said could be applied to South Main Street. You could take a building down, build something
Russell.
nicer, or Russell, I guess. I'm not familiar, but you could put the 6 units with the commercial underneath still. You don't need to
No, that's the
build a
problem
big
is that we
building
don't
for 12
want,
units.
6 units isn't enough when you're building a big building.
But if,
That's
no,
the
if
piece.
he's saying build building for building, small
No.
buildings.
No,
lot
he's
of-
suggesting in Ithaca, which I drive through every single time I drive to Oswego.
You probably recognize
Like,
the
I
building.
know the space. I know exactly what you're talking
Going down
about.
79 into
Exactly.
town on the left.
Yep. But on Russell Street, that could be doable in terms of still keeping it to the 6 per structure. My concerns are, once you start, how much do you grow it? Do we do 8? Do we do 10? Do we do 12? At what point does it become not a nicely designed 6 apartment structure? When does it become just a box that I can fit as many apartments in as I want?
If I can respond?
By all means.
First of all, from the developer's perspective, they often don't find 6 units to be feasible to actually build a building. In certain, like, especially where the real estate is valuable. And I would also, to your concern, say, this is where design guidelines come in. You can't just build a box, like, or kind of down that hill right now, from there.
Well, he built inside the guidelines of the town.
Well, this is why.
That's what he did.
it
Like,
might-
he literally went to the town and was like, hey, I can't go above this much because I'd love to put a roof on it, but
This
if
is
I
why-
put a roof peak on it, I'm outside of the guidelines.
This is why we're talking about.
Which is why they're flat topped.
rethinking design guidelines.
I'm always gonna, you guys can pass, do whatever you're gonna do, that's fine. The idea of adding a structure that has more than 6 units opens Pandora's box. And it
It's gonna
changes the dynamic of 5. Because that literally means you allow me to do that, I'm tearing down Winter Street and I'm putting a 14-bedroom multi-story apartment building.
If it's new, perfect. I'm good with that.
It's just, there will be,
You're good with, I'm
I'm
not.
good with that.
there will be a ton of opposition to more than 6 units. And the store owners will come out, every single storefront owner that I talk to is like, why are they doing that? It's crazy. Parking is a problem. They keep saying, solve parking. Then bring up something like that. Solve the park. And to solve the problem, I can come up with some suggestions, but it's not gonna be easy and it's not gonna be cheap. But what the discussion that we're having now is so premature.
I mean, it's not premature. I think this is the whole point of our conversation. The whole point of what we're doing is to have these conversations. Yeah, I'm not.
I'm just, it's like,
We have,
Alexis has.
Alexis, please.
Yeah, so it sounds like, from a couple members that there's a discomfort with that. You're talking a lot about downtown. What about other parts of town?
The whole of 5 is essentially the village.
it's not village commercial though.
It's not village commercial.
Not by
it's,
zone, but
It's
yeah.
pretty much the housing. So do you want that next door to you?
Good with it.
Phil's good with it because he likes the spot. But I'm saying that if we allow it, that's what goes on Warren Street. That's what goes on Wentworth.
For someone that lives next to a 6-unit building, I live right next to one. It's my next door neighbor. The advantage is I get to screen the people that live there. But if someone else were screening the people that were gonna live right next to me, I might have a little bit of a problem. But 6 units is a lot of people living in one building.
And it's not just 6.
Oh,
We're,
yeah.
we're,
you've
we're
got-
opening, we're literally opening Pandora's box to allow how many units?
Yep.
You said 6 isn't enough.
Will has a comment as
If
well.
I could jump in
Yes,
here
please.
really
Please.
quickly. So I think if the town wanted to change that units to a density base, I don't think that it would simply get rid of the unit cap total. One of our proposals was to transition it to a units per acre, which the town is kind of doing right now by having that, just saying you can only have 6 units in a building. But if you moved it to a units per acre, what it would do is you would still be putting limits on how many units can be on a given amount of land.
Exactly.
So I don't know how big the Russell Street property is, but if looking at this, if you wanted to keep the level of density that 6 units do, which is right now the max is 4.88 units per acre. So what you could do is you could maintain that acreage, but with changing it from that kind of cap of just saying you can only have this many units in a building, what you're doing is you're giving developers the freedom to build in a way that makes the most sense for them and is the most economically feasible for them, without kind of just putting in place this cap on how many units they can put in the building. But you're not just opening up, you're not opening up Pandora's box in of how many units, it's not gonna be a matter of, just getting as many units into a building as you possibly can, because they're still gonna be going before you, and they're still gonna be saying, well, you can only have X number of units per acre, so it's gonna be limited by how big their plot of land is.
So if I,
So-
go ahead.
In a per acre, it's not gonna be, 14 units in that, if 14 units in that building, is still gonna be limited.
So they have 100 acres, and you build one building, you put 100 units in it. Is that what you're saying? If it's 1 acre per unit? I think that's what you just said.
No,
Well,
it
number
would
of
be,
units.
right now
Currently-
it's
currently
4
you
per
need-
0.8, so you have 100 acre, you have 520 units in 100 acres.
Can I frame this in a slightly different way? If we are gonna be like sticking to,
Same.
the number that was just given of 4 units per acre roughly, I'm thinking about that in terms of density. That would allow, if we didn't change that number, which maybe we should, that would allow someone to build more densely in a single-family neighborhood, especially with ADUs, than you can actually do in a multifamily building. Which is,
With the four, then, yes.
which is a little bit like odd.
Oh, no, and the 4 number I was just throwing out as an example, that wasn't an
Yeah,
official
okay.
recommendation.
Okay,
That
got
was
it.
just the
Kind
current
of where
numbers.
we are right now, yeah.
So, Will, I appreciate Will's ability to look outside the box and find a way to do more than 6 units per building, however you try and disguise it, and I appreciate that.
And I can see where Phil's coming from. Like, there are beautiful new buildings. I know there are so many schools across the United States that their residential life program has gone to a commercial-based residential life program, where they build commercial on the bottom and res hall above it. My concerns are changing the characteristics of downtown. As nice as that is, as nice as that building is, this 5 area where it's being suggested
They're not suggesting that 5.
I mean, when you talk about
is
downtown,
suggesting 5.
if we're gonna
That's
talk
what they're talking about.
downtown, including village commercial, which is not number 5
Yes.
necessarily, includes historic buildings that are far larger than 5 units per building.
I just know that you're going to end up with pushback based off of, we already had pushback to put 6 units in the building behind Patty's space.
That was,
Can
That'll
I just say
fit
one more
14.
point
That'll fit 14,
about the map that's in front
right?
of you?
Like,
Please.
Yes.
The map that's in front of you, we're not suggesting anything. We're asking you. These are the identified areas that came out in the master plan, that came out in the community meeting, where people said housing makes sense here, housing makes sense here. And then there's a list of questions. Okay, so now you're looking at those places. If an area makes sense, what might make sense in that area? Are you comfortable with increased building height in that area? Yes, no? Okay, are you comfortable with more units in a building in this area? Yes, no? Okay, we're not, it's trying to get a sense of if these areas make sense, like it sounds like in the single family district that's in water and sewer, there's comfort with reducing lot sizes for single family homes. That's excellent feedback for us. There may not be comfort with some of these other things that you may be comfortable with in parts of the ag zone, or, it's just, so I just want to make clear that we're asking you to give us direction.
And it's not only
Based
just,
on the best.
and it's not only just us, it's what we're hearing from the public. And I know when you had your individual meetings, 1-on-1 or 2-on with Judy, there was a lot of concern about property taxes in this town. Besides parking, taxes is the 2 top issues. And we already had an economist do a preliminary study that said the more apartments, the higher the bigger multi-units, the higher the property taxes are going to go.
When you say
We
we-
had an economist say that. He said, I'll continue to work on this. I'll make it from a preliminary study to a more in-depth study, but I need to be
Just to
paid.
clarify, we did not have an economist, you had an
I
economist.
had an
and
economist
you.
that worked with the state and was on the governor, worked with the governor as one of their main economists. Very well respected. And so we are concerned about property taxes. That's that's the main thing, and filling up the schools. And it's not our job to make it financially viable for developers to make a lot of money. That's not our role.
It is to some extent our role to make it financially viable for developers to create more housing to meet market demands.
Well, and also to expand your tax base. But Mike, can I ask who that economist was?
Doesn't expand our tax base, though.
That's
Judy,
actually quite contrary to all the research I've ever seen on this topic. So I'd love to know who that economist is.
I will send you the-
Maybe look at some of that person's work.
Judy, you have to remember that the state of New Hampshire,
finish.
one second, the state of New Hampshire is based solely on property tax. You increase the number of people.
I'm very aware of this.
Okay, like, I don't know how you increase the number of people with a reduced amount of space and increase our tax base. It doesn't. That's 500 people live in one spot that gets taxed instead of 500
You
different
have
spots.
economists at UNH who would not agree with that, what you just said. So I'm just
Okay.
wondering who the economist is that Mike had worked with, because it really would be helpful to us to know so we can look at that person's research.
So I will send you the preliminary, I can email you that. I provided it to the planning board 2 years ago. He just asked that his name not be made public until we're ready for him to do a blown out study. But lo and behold, no one wanted that study blown out at all. But I can definitely send you that email with the information.
So a lot of interesting points, but I think what really is interesting to me, and I think the judge touched on this earlier, that we're like at this inflection point. I was just totaling up 2013, 5,200 students at Plymouth State. 2022, 3,872. So we've lost 1,500 students. We've lost 700 undergraduate students. So those are, a portion of those kids are looking for apartments elsewhere, off campus or whatever. So we lost 700 kids. And I'm not against density and looking for opportunities for, people to build larger buildings potentially, but am I missing where all this population is that it's looking to live in Plymouth? This is where I'm not aware of this huge need.
Two responses to that. The housing market is very tight in Plymouth. It's very difficult to find a
Agreed.
house in Plymouth. And then my second point would be, because we are making opportunities for developers to build things, they're not just going to run in without looking at the numbers and just well, I'm just going to build everything now. And
I totally agree. I totally agree. But it feels, and I mentioned this in the meeting in August, it feels like we've focused our focus solely on density, and we haven't focused a lot on, which may be more beneficial economically, and I'm not an economics major, but is there opportunities to create more single family residences in other parts of the town that may bring in different people to town? Like, I think I've lived here the shortest amount of time. 6 years ago, there was very little housing that I would consider living in Plymouth. And I think when I look around today, there's very little housing that I would consider living in Plymouth available on the market. And I think we need a lot of single family residents for middle income people in this town. And that's where I think, to me personally, there seems to be a big need, because when I talk to people that come to work where I work, it's, why don't they look in Plymouth? We know why. The taxes, right? You could have the same exact house in Holderness when I moved here 6 years ago, and your taxes are half of what you're paying here for a single family residence. And I'm all for the density stuff, but it feels like we're not maybe looking at other things that might be beneficial for the town as well.
Part of the discussion that we've been having on the housing committee is about some of the benefits of density, including the need, if you start building houses out in the country, to build roads to those houses, bring other facilities there, and maintain those roads and plow those roads and all these things that ultimately raise your taxes more. And
But those houses pay more taxes too.
Do
Those
they?
Well, I will.
I do.
Yeah.
Tell you what, we had
I
a
will say if
resident-
you're on a larger piece of property in the outskirts of town, you tend to be
You
paying
know
more
what I never
taxes.
understood about the argument? The roads are already there. The plow trucks already go there. We're not bringing sewer down to the back of Cummings Hill Road. So we hear a lot of that. The roads, the plowing, I understand the maintenance towards more. But what I've never actually understood is, really, is my question?
Well,
The
do you-
roads are there, the
but
plow trucks
do you
go
see
there.
how many new
The school
developments
buses run there.
get built on new roads, new cul-de-sacs,
Yep.
other things off those main roads,
Like Chattering Lane,
which
Yeah.
which then get taken over by the town
20 years later.
and have
20
to be-
years later.
and have to be maintained by the town. And
But currently it's not. They're just hoping it's, the original builder is hoping to get rid
just
of
feel
it
it's
because he's
wrong.
sick of plowing it himself, but he's still maintaining the roads.
And all of those houses are probably paying at least on Chattering Lane $10,000 a year in taxes, if not more.
I would guess if you added up the property taxes paid by the homes on that road versus the length of that road, you'd find that it's a much more cost-effective use of, it's probably a net income to the town compared to the amount of miles of road and the taxes paid by the other homes throughout the rest of town.
What Mark said
But it's
is,
dense, it's fairly
Yeah.
dense.
It's really dense.
what Mark said is what everybody keeps saying in this town. We need single-family homes where people can invest in a home and meet the American dream. Every single person I talk does not want more
the problem we have-
density. We want what Mark said.
well,
It's the costs right now. That's the problem. We had someone that built a home on our road, right across from Matt's place. He built the house, moved to town, got his first tax bill. The house just went on the market.
Which one was that?
Oh, must be
He's right next to Pete.
201.
I don't think we need to talk about individual properties.
But it's the problem that we face in general is that
The taxes are too
the taxes
high.
are oppressive. So we need more single-family homes to bring down that.
And we are talking about single-family homes and
But
reducing
not
some of the lot
nearly
sizes
enough.
on single-family homes.
We're not
nearly
talking
enough.
about it enough. We're too
We-
concentrated.
I'm fighting over the density because my concern is that you increase the density. You know, people say the students are a problem. I get it. You know, people don't like seeing the students. They haven't. It is what it is.
I love it.
Reality is I've got 1,000 people that live in the town that use limited amounts of our services. They don't send anybody to the school.
Yep.
They
spend lots of money on Main Street.
They paid lots of money on Main Street, and I pay $345,000 a year in taxes on their
But
houses.
just to clarify though,
That-
we spent probably 40 minutes talking about lot sizes and setbacks and all these things for single-family houses mostly in the single-family residential and potentially beyond in some of these other potential overlays or
And the
something.
piece that Phil brought up, I think that is a fantastic spot. I think they look fantastic, and they'd look really good on Tenny Mountain.
So I'm going to say for now, I'm not sure we're going to resolve these issues tonight. Alexis.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back about. I do think that's an excellent point, and I respected on the CRM comment relating to single family. That's come up a lot in our discussions about how that is a desire of a lot of people. We heard that a lot in the engagement process. In speaking with Habitat, because I know, for example, that project that I know the potential for 50 or so homes. The cost of building the road and connecting to water and sewer is millions of dollars. And so perhaps maybe what some of the recommendations need to look at in addition to some of the zoning, like I know, Will, we didn't even get to the 79E and some of the other, non-zoning recommendations, but maybe there are, other recommendations that can speak to ways to create that infrastructure, channeling CDBG, how the town applies for CDBG dollars, things like that. So I do respect that comment, and I think perhaps, that's something that we've been looking at more this week actually, and speaking with some developers to wrap up the phase one based on the comments we got. So I understand what you're saying about the revenue generated by, say, those 50 homes. That's great, but you need that initial investment of millions of dollars to make that happen. And then this is Habitat doing this, that's one thing, but a for-profit developer, those homes are not gonna sell for prices that people can afford. It's not gonna solve the problem that we've heard time and again. So I just wanted to speak to that it really is the infrastructure that is the concern, and we are aware, and I think maybe we can, speak to that a little bit more in the report.
One thing we keep forgetting, we're a small town. We're not a city that can just gather all these density units and say, we'll take care of you. We've got enough money. The taxes, we'll just raise the taxes. We're a small little town, and sometimes people may forget that saying, oh, we need more, these lower density apartments and all that. It's just the town needs single-family homes. They need the American dream for the people that inhabit the town, and equity in the home is the way to go. And they keep feeling like it's being ignored.
I just want to say one thing to that, and I want to move on. Plymouth, as we've talked about before, when you look at it historically, was a much denser place in the village than it is currently right now. And whether or not that's sustainable at the historic density today is another question. But to say that,
But that was
we
the
are
1940s.
not, but to say we're not that is, I think, ignoring a lot of our already built architecture, architecture that's come down over the years, and that is part of what this town is. It does have a dense, vibrant, at times much denser than it is now, downtown
During
area.
that time frame, it was all centric around a train and walking.
So I don't want to get into a large discussion. I think this is a discussion that we're going to have to carry over into another meeting to finish. I would like, before we go, Alexis, you just mentioned some of those other incentives and such, and we talked a little bit about the revitalization tax relief in 79E, which there seemed to be some positive thoughts about, including in the multifamily residential area. And we talked about the housing opportunity zone, which there seemed to be less excitement about, but maybe we could talk more about that. And I know on the docket, and we're probably not going to solve this tonight, but I'd love to hear a little bit of description from you or Will or Judy about the potential inclusionary zoning ordinance, the workforce housing ordinance, and what that would look like, and if you can give us a kind of little prep on that.
Sure. Well, I can talk a little bit about the workforce housing case studies we've looked at and whatnot, and then the workforce housing, since it's been adopted, there's a really nice report that New Hampshire Housing Finance put together of case studies of communities that have taken measures to address this issue. And they handle it in a variety of ways, I'm sure, based on capacity. But I mean, the typical things that an ordinance like that would include is one, a measure of, like there's going to be some sort of deed restriction, like the property is, for say 30 years, I saw that number a lot in ordinances looked at, either the rent or the sale price, it's limited to what is described in the workforce housing law. So that's one big feature, is there's going to be some deed restriction. The other concern, of course, is enforcement, especially in a town that doesn't have a lot of capacity. But usually these ordinances do have some mechanism for monitoring. I mean, just like any other issue that maybe enforcement is a challenge. I mean, sure, it's not necessarily going to be solved, but the ordinances do have a mechanism for ensuring that when a property is sold, for example, has a deed restriction, that that's handled correctly, or that if a rental unit is being income restricted, that there's some monitoring going on with that. And I think one thing that a smaller town might do is outsourcing some of that to a nonprofit or something to help with that monitoring. But so those are the two big features: is you're going to have some sort of deed restriction in place for the units that are officially workforce housing, and then some mechanism of monitoring compliance as much as you can handle. And then the only other thing with that is we talked a bit about that being tied to perhaps some incentives, whether it's okay, maybe you can have a little more units per acre if you're including some of these workforce units. So it's kind of twofold. One is establishing the workforce ordinance, and then how to incentivize it. Will, did you want to add? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna, if we, I had a question, maybe Will can answer this. To me, it sounds like the first half of what you said, Alexis, was the workforce housing ordinance, and the second part where you're incentivized is the inclusionary zoning ordinance. I'm trying to like parse out how these two things are distinct from one another, because they're both incentivizing or encouraging in some way monitoring workforce housing. One of them seems to be more about the monitoring part, and the other seems to be more about the incentivizing part.
You can combine them. Some of the case studies, so some of the communities have just a standalone workforce housing ordinance, like a section, a chapter in your zoning. And then others, they might have an inclusionary zoning ordinance where they, in there, describe the workforce housing and how that's monitored and whatnot. So, I mean, you can do it either way. I mean, there are examples of communities doing it both ways. So they're going to be tied together.
And I will just say, for anybody who knows anything about inclusionary zoning across the country, in New Hampshire, it can't be a mandate, it has to be an incentive, if I understand correctly.
That's correct.
Just in case you are thinking mandates and stuff, it has to be an incentive in New Hampshire, you can't mandate.
Well, that's typically why it's done through some type of an overlay district.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just speaking on the inclusionary ordinance side of it, because sometimes, as Alexis said, they are sometimes combined into one ordinance, but sometimes they're split apart. We chose to represent them as two because they are kind of different ideas, and we wanted to make sure we're clear. The workforce housing ordinance that we talk about here is more focused on the monitoring and the accountability, and the inclusionary zoning is focused more on the incentives. Essentially what that would do is it would give incentives for developers to, say you're doing cluster development of a number of single family homes. If you did the math out, you could build 10 single family homes on that. What an inclusionary zoning would typically do is it would say, hey, you can build 10, or if you set aside one for workforce housing and you deed restrict that and you set it to a AMI of somewhere between 80 and 60%, AMI being average median income, so 80% of the average income in Plymouth, you would be able to build, say, 12 units, 12 single family homes in that area. So you would get so you'd have to build that one workforce housing level affordability, and then you would also get 2 to kind of recoup the cost. So what that would do is it would give developers an incentive to produce workforce housing that they might not otherwise without that.
Would be determined the median income was in Plymouth?
It's published by
Yeah, so for the workforce,
it's an area.
Yeah, area median income.
Area median income.
So for a household of 4, so for ownership, it's based on a household of 4 at 100% of their median income, and that's $100,000 a year for 2023. For rental, the pricing is 60% for a household of 3. Offhand, I don't remember what that is. I remember the 100,000. It was easy to remember, but we can check that. But so that's what the pricing affordability is based on. If someone was earning that income, what they could spend without spending more than around 30% on housing costs.
So you can spend $30,000 on PITI.
Do we have any questions about this? And that would inform whether or not we want to think about going forward with inclusionary zoning, workforce housing ordinance, or anything of this sort?
For me, it's just an example of, and I know you said, we can put some single family homes in there. I don't see that happening. I see as many units as they can that are multiple.
That's pretty much what we want.
And I'm concerned that each, with incentivizing that sort of housing, multiple, it takes away from the potential for single-family homes. That's my concern. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's going to get a lot of opposition.
Well, do the math.
You think the workforce housing?
No, if you do the math that we just did, that's $2,500 a month of our county's median income. That's literally
It's still affordable.
a $225,000 home. That's
Right.
pretty much what we were talking about earlier. We want more homes that people can afford. I mean, I want a whole community of
I do too.
workforce housing homes, because if we build a whole community of homes at $225,000 to be able to purchase, that's like affordable for my kids.
You're not gonna get that without either, subsidy or a wonderful nonprofit like Habitat, or incentivizing a for-profit developer. They need to be able to make what they need to make it work. So if you want that pricing in this market, you have to do something to make it viable for the developers.
Feasible.
Family homes, yeah.
Could I actually ask for something?
We need a bankable project.
Can I ask for something? I think it would be really helpful here in having this discussion at another meeting. If we could see potentially some good examples of this, not that you'd have to like write it from scratch for Plymouth in terms of our needs, but even just some existing examples that we could look at and see exactly what that looks like in like as language. I would be kind of interested in that. I don't know if anybody else would.
Yes.
I would like to see it. I
Yeah.
mean, I already
Something that
know-
incentivizes a builder to come in to build 30 homes in the $225,000 range. I don't know what we'd have to do as a town to incentivize that, but I think it would be.
You're not gonna find new construction for.
So
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's like, what would we have to do to
It would
get
be the
that?
whole, yeah, that's the idea, like Will was saying, if you have, say, 10, market rate units, and you're giving a bonus to the developer for including, say, 2 workforce housing priced units, that's one way, because you're right, that's not gonna happen unless you are a mission-based nonprofit who's maybe getting land donated, then that, knocks the cost way down, or you're getting federal grant money to handle infrastructure. That's one bucket. But for a for-profit developer, you're right, that's not gonna happen in a full subdivision of all workforce housing. It would be, they can have a couple and give them a little.
Like, I think that's a
wiggle room
great-
to-
I'm not 100. I'd like to know more information, but are we talking? It could be apartments in a building, or would it
Single-family
have
home.
to be single-family homes?
We can do whatever we want.
that would be up to us, I suppose.
There's one definition of affordability, of workforce housing for rentals, and there's one for owned, but. it
All of
doesn't
my
matter
houses
if
meet
rentals or single, or.
for the rentals for workforce housing.
It could be apartments or.
All of my houses meet, because I talked to Judy about that earlier. And,
So-
all of mine are in the price range for the county for workforce housing.
So if it's coming on 9 o'clock at this point, and I know we can stay till 10. No, probably
thank you.
do not want to. So if I can kind of just like try to wrap up a little bit here. I think in the beginning of talking about all these recommendations, I tried to start with things that we had broad agreement on, and I think I would love to start to see some language that we could respond to more materially, and kind of really kind of hone that in. And when it came to the density issues, not about like dimensional density issues, but more about building types and multifamily and all of that sort of thing, I would like to see all of us take some time to think about where we agree. And I think
Bravo.
I think we agree on more than our disagreements may suggest superficially. And there are definitely things we wholeheartedly disagree on. But I think there's also a lot of area we do have agreement, and I would like to think about that and hopefully build on that going forward.
Yep.
And so for next time we meet, we can actually start the conversation where we agree and then get into some of the more thorny issues. And I'd love to see some examples of some of these ordinances that maybe can send to Joseph or something that we can take a look at and have a little bit clearer sense of what it would actually entail. Anybody want to add to that, or?
I'd like that. I want to see that, and I'm more apt to see some agreement with that than the 75E, where I'd rather see the town giving a density bonus rather than giving up some taxes.
Do you have one question there? It seemed at the last meeting we talked about this, the Housing Opportunity Zone 75E, 79E didn't have a whole lot of support, but the revitalization tax relief had more support,
I think that's my recollection.
where we could actually rehab previous buildings for a tax incentive.
The only problem with that is the mixed usage. That just, it concerns me, because it talks about in the VC district. That literally means mixed use on Tenny Mountain Highway.
It could also be revitalizing stuff in the multifamily residential.
But that in green says VC.
The 79E community revitalization, one of the big differences between that and the HOP form of it is the community revitalization has to be tied to the downtown. That's just one of the rules of the state for it. It has to be linked to a downtown.
But downtown
It's just that-
doesn't need to be in the VC itself as long as it's within the vicinity of more broadly understood downtown, right?
Yes, yeah, it has to be tied into what can make a reasonable argument of a downtown village center.
Which could be the MFR.
Sure.
I would argue, I would think.
Which could be what?
The MFR, multifamily
Multifamily.
residential.
Yep.
So I think this is a good path forward.
I think we made some progress.
Anybody at Barrett have thoughts about any of what I said to conclude?
This was very helpful to hear all of this. The one thing I would ask, if we could maybe continue to look at the map and the questions, you know, so
Yeah.
I think the feedback on the areas and the concerns people may have about this or that or the other, but in terms of the specific things that may make sense in one area but not another, that can maybe be a good starting point.
Yes.
I might add, showing where the water is, showing where the sewer is on the town, and then making some,
It's already, it's there.
is it?
Sewer's not on there.
Sewer's not on there.
Water.
I was looking at the blue line. I'm like, it is. No, it's not.
That's right. I can't see it.
The wrong water.
Sewer boundary, yeah, that is on the map you have. It's a blue outline.
No, that's the water district. That's not the actual water lines and sewer
Oh,
lines.
you want to see the, okay. I believe we have the
So,
ability to do that.
so we know what areas could potentially go down to quarter acre zoning. If we see the overlap with the water, where
Quarter
it's
acre zoning
coverage.
or different number of units per acre or whatever, yeah.
And we could also see where it would be pretty easy to extend it, maybe too.
Because you don't have any water sewer out by you, right? Yeah. It doesn't run up over the hill.
Okay.
No.
It ends.
It,
It never comes in on Reservoir Road past like the Diamond's
Well,
house.
I want to say thank you all. This is a complicated bunch of issues, and I think we made some headway.
Right at that main,
Yeah.
line, 3 feet lower than the road.
What else?
actually,
That's right.
on Yetton Road, do they actually have?
It goes out again.
If the housing committee would like to separately make a motion to adjourn,
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Housing committee.
all in favor of the housing committee adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Move to adjourn.
You guys are adjourned. Wait a second. Is there on the agenda? Is there any unfinished business from the board members? Probably not. No. Staff, no. Okay. Public comments? I don't think anyone's on Zoom, right? No. Okay. All right.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm too tired to even say no.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank
you, guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barrett.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.